when did you move from reader to writer? Obviously for Vera there was no real transition. And yeah.
I started with writing.
Wouter?
I think I was 3 or 4 years old. As soon as I found out that there was such a thing as a writer, I wanted to be one. And I did not know how to read or write, so I would dictate stories to my parents who would write them down for me, and then I would illustrate them. And fortunately, none of those have survived. These were not works of precocious genius, I can safely say. So, and so it was never a choice with me. I was just compelled to do this. And I was compelled to keep doing it. And I made my first professional sale when I was 25, but then I'd been doing it for 20 years. And I've had a lot of practice by then, and I've written a lot of really bad books that you, fortunately, will never have to read.
Audience questions will come later.
Yeah, because likewise, because I started so young, it's just mixed up. When was I reading? When was I writing? And as my parents say, that I was telling stories before I was old enough to write them down. I was just always making things up, and it really was because I loved reading so much that it was natural to want to do that myself. So I always wrote. When I was a child, it was short stories, it was novellas in my teens, and then 20s moving into novels, because apparently there's not a huge market for short stories and novellas. So novel writing. So I started doing that, sold my first at 30, which is pretty good, except yes, I've been writing for 28 years telling stories. And yes, my first published novel was not the first novel I ever wrote. There are 3 that you could not pay me enough to show you.
Let's talk a little bit about that first professional sale and how that came about. Kelly, first in general, and Wouter, I'd like to talk first about being a writer of naval adventures and then transitioning into the science fiction.
So I had a few short stories published. They were the type that were published and you were paid in copies. So my first actual sale would have been written. And I was writing that for years, and it took me a very long time because any time that I would dare tell anybody what I was writing about werewolves, this was the late 90s, people would say, oh God, Kelly, if you have to write about that stuff, and really we'd rather you didn't. At least write about vampires. People buy books about vampires. So I just loved this story. It was the one that really held my passion. So I finally asked an editor friend to take a look at it, and did he think it was worth pursuing, or should I be working on something new? He offered to recommend it to an agent. So I was like, awesome. I mean, this was the best big step forward, because I had tried querying. I think they got to the word werewolf and sent me the form rejection. I never even got a nibble. It was always the form rejection. Thank you for submitting. This is not for us. Good luck. So he offered to recommend me to an agent. I was terribly excited until he told me that she really wasn't interested. Apparently, he called up and said, would you read my student's writing? She said, what's it about? He said, werewolves. He said, no. She continued to say no until she tells me she only said yes to get him off the phone. So I was like, why am I? This was the day of bubble jet printers, which would spew pages everywhere, and you had to print something and send it, and I was cursing the whole time. My poor husband had listened to me cursing, going, this woman doesn't want to see it. Why am I doing this? Send it in, and about a week later, she called and offered to represent me. And it was because she has no interest in horror. She's not even a big fantasy reader, but what she does like is dark thrillers and strong female characters. So the book had that. This happened to be about werewolves. So what she took me on in September of '99, and I had sold US, UK, and Canadian rights, several foreign rights, and movie rights within 2 months. of that. So it was years and years of hearing nothing but no, 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 until the one person who didn't want to read it took that on. So very lucky for me.
Well, as I say, I've been writing obsessively from a very early age, and when I was at university, I began to actually submit the stories to various markets, and was rejected roundly and rightly, because while I could write, while the sentences scanned and the action moved along, I really didn't know how to tell a story yet. So that was where that was, and I wrote. In my 20s, I wrote 2 novels that received a certain amount of encouragement from publishers, but they ended up turning them down. And having read them recently, I know why now. But I was writing, because I was writing obsessively and every day and compulsively, I wrote in a lot of different genres. I was writing literary fiction, I was writing mysteries, I was writing historical fiction. I was writing contemporary thrillers, et cetera, et cetera. And the Sea Adventure Stories came out of left field, really. I'm also a gamer, and I devised a game of tabletop combat for the Age of Fighting sale. And I thought, I'll publish this game, and it will support my writing career. Which if any of you have ever tried to market a pencil and paper game, you know it's the most ridiculous thing in the world. So, and then I thought, well, I did all this research on the Age of Fighting sale, so maybe I can turn that into a novel. And that's what sold. In the meantime, I had got an agent. It was the same agent that all my friends had. And it was the same agent that I and my friends later fired. But the agent did manage to get that first sale. And then a sale that followed that. So I had planned a 10-book series. They bought 5, and then the market for historical fiction in the U.S. completely collapsed. So I needed a new career. And once again, I was obsessively sending out proposals in every conceivable genre. And some years before, I had started to write some science fiction, and I had written science fiction in between the sailing books because science fiction was very, very different. And I really needed a change from what I'd been writing. And so because I was writing about 200 men-on ships, I wrote a proposal for a science fiction novel that had a female protagonist on dry land, on another world, and it dealt with anthropology. And that, oddly enough, sold some years later. It's one of those insane things. It went to one publisher, they put a buying hold, so it went to another publisher, it was lost in the mailroom. By the time everyone found out it was lost in the mailroom, that publisher put a buying hold. Then it went to another publisher who had just acquired the first publisher and therefore put a buying hold. So it went back to the second publisher, which again lost it in the mailroom, and then they canceled their science fiction line.
Explain buying hold for...
Buying hold means they're just not buying any, they have too many manuscripts in stock, so they're just not buying any more until they've processed all those earlier manuscripts. And then it went to another publisher, and it was a new publisher, Tor, which is now the largest science fiction publisher, but back then it was a very small operation. It had 3 employees. And it went to Jim Bain at Tor, and he bought it.
Who were Tor's first 3 employees?
It was Tom Doherty, who was the publisher.
Obviously, still is.
It was Jim Bain, who was the editor, and who later left to start Bain Books. And then there was Mrs. Tom Doherty, who was the bookkeeper. And so I became a science fiction writer without really ever intending to. So it's an accidental career, and it's lasted over 30 years, and it's wonderful.
Good.
Okay, so the question will sort of have to be rephrased for the Israeli market because the Israeli market is extremely not the same. Right?
Yeah, agents are less of a thing.
I mean, okay, first of all, now we more or less have the Israeli market. When I started writing seriously, when I started writing short stories, it was about 25, and there wasn't such a
So like
thing.
2 years ago?
Yeah, so more or less. There wasn't such a thing in the Israeli market. I mean, there was,
For genre fiction.
yeah. There was simply that there were no magazines except for the Meimad, the magazine of the Israeli Society for Science Fiction and Fantasy.
Yeah, we had, I'll just interject and say we had a magazine in the late 70s, early 80s, and that went away. And then there was, let's call it lull.
Okay, there was no market. There was the Meimad, which published more or less one story of local fiction here. It's supposed to be
Quarterly?
more or less.
That
I mean,
was-
and also the editor didn't like my style because he was a fan of Philip K. Dick and Bester, and I wasn't either of those. So he really didn't like my style. He's a good friend of mine, but he didn't like my writing style, so he didn't publish anything I wrote. And there was that was it. That was the whole market we had. So we had to invent stuff. And luckily for us, there was the wonderful thing called the internet that was starting to write. I don't know if you heard about it or anything. It's a wonderful thing. It lets people talk to each other without being near each other. And we had this...
It's Israel. Compared to what
Yeah.
the distances those guys are used to, we're all really near each other all the time.
Yeah. And we had that.
See, I thought the internet was all for having arguments with complete strangers.
When I met Fed online, that we were complete strangers and we had a lot of arguments.
Oh yeah, I'm so very good at that. So basically we had to make the market. First we had the message board or forum in IOL, which was a science fiction forum, and we post stories there once in a while, and then we started having contests, forum contests or contests by the society, the Israeli Society for Science Fiction and Fantasy. Later we started having specialized forums for writers. And still, it wasn't a market. And not only that, you'd go to people and tell them, well, we can write stories in Hebrew. And they'd say, come on, there's no such thing as science fiction in Hebrew. It doesn't sound right. Like, yes, we can write science fiction in Hebrew, and it can happen in Israel. No, come on. Science fiction happens in the United States. It can't happen in Israel. Science fiction in Tel Aviv is impossible. In Haifa, where I live, it's unheard of. And okay, so maybe we'll try writing or reading science fiction which happens in Israel, but they'll still be Joe and Jane because science fiction characters can't be Israeli. And there were tremendous arguments, and we basically had to build everything from scratch. So that was our market, and that's how all my generation of writers started, by using the internet as a market.
Yeah, and I would say as an editor, in my first run as a book editor, nearly every book that I got from a local writer would start with the pattern of what I would call John and Jane at the airport in Denver. With zero relation to that writer's life. And that reflects it back to the issue of representation we talked about earlier. The more science fiction there is written about people in Israel, the more science fiction there is written about people in Israel.
One must say that more or less 99% of the science fiction written by Israeli authors, which tell stories about John and Jane in Denver or whatever, sucks badly. Because Israelis, they know Denver or any other place in the United States or England or anything of the sort. They know that from cultural works, from books, from movies, they don't know it firsthand. So they write stuff that they don't know, and it's all stereotypical, and it's all stuff they read. So it's not that good. Don't do that if any of you guys, please.
Yes, also, if you happen to have written a story in Hebrew and you're translated in English, don't change the names to John and Jane, which I've recently seen and was a bit annoyed by. So, you started out. How was it at the beginning and going on interacting with fandom, which is such a unique aspect of science fiction? Kelly, go down.
Yeah, it's been an interesting thing because I sort of came in right before the online starts. The online kind of, and we're starting in the mainstream. When I wrote, so Bitten came out in 2001. I did not have a website until my second book came out because now I'm a former computer programmer, so it's not like I didn't understand computers, didn't understand the internet, couldn't program my own website. I certainly could. But at that time, it felt presumptuous to have a website where you only had one book out. So it came out with my second book. And that was when you would start getting email. And it was a very interesting experience to start actually hearing from readers, and readers beyond where I actually lived. Because sure, I was accustomed to hearing from readers in Toronto or in my immediate area, but hearing from readers from other places. And then it would go on to online forums, and then on to social media, Twitter, Facebook, MySpace back in the MySpace day. And it really, so I've seen the evolution of that for better and for worse, and I think for mostly it is for better because I really enjoy having that interaction with readers, that ability to talk to readers one-on-one, no matter where they are, answer their questions quickly. That has really been great for me. And to hear their concerns, to hear their feedback has really, I think, helped. If there's any downside to it, I would say that because I am a writer who likes to tell stories and obviously wants those stories to be entertaining and enjoyed, there is a slight tendency when, of course, you get the criticism to throw up my hands and go, oh my God, I failed! And to learn how to sort of step back from that and take a more objective look at it. And you certainly do get a whole lot more of that. Now with that closer, connection, readers, especially teen readers, have no problem telling you what you've done wrong.
Well, my experience with fandom goes back to the days when fanzines were written on mimeographs and sent around by the mail instead of appearing online, because there was no online for any of that. So I found out about fandom when I was in college. I started attending science fiction conventions. I helped my friends print their fanzines on this incredibly complicated, primitive media that we had in those days. So fandom's been there all along. I remember when Star Trek fans were new. Okay, and they were starting to come to science fiction conventions, and the old fans were going, who are these guys, and why are their ears like that?
Years later, anime fans would get that exact same response.
Yes. Well, the ear question continues over the decades. So yeah, I mean, fandom has always been there for me. Which is one of those great things that you can go to a science fiction convention and you can see friends that you haven't seen in years and catch up. And of course, in my case, being a professional, I go to more professional conventions like the World Fantasy Convention, which is mainly writers and editors and artists. And you can sort of catch up with what's happening in the industry there. So that's, yeah, it's all great. It's all positive feedback.
Okay, so fandom for me is sort of the baseline because, as I said before, that's where it all happened. We didn't have anything else. We had just the fandom. It took time before we had anything that resembled professional magazines or book publishers. So we had the fandom, we had the forums, and it was great, and it was awful because we post a story to the forum and we get immediate response. And it's, you get hooked up in that. I mean, when I started publishing in print, when we finally had print, it was awful publishing a story and not getting responses. And how could one live like that? It was, you have a story published and you might get one response here, one response there, and how do I know if it's good? So it was all fandom in the beginning, and we're quite a close-knit community, I think, we've become. So I don't know how it is without it. If there can be anything without the fandom.
There's certainly people writing genre stuff in.
Certainly people writing genre stuff in Israel who aren't part of the fandom now, which we've always had those, but they were really, few and far between. I think
we couldn't target them.
Some of them will continue saying that oh, my book that takes place in a future where there are clear sociological and technological differences is not science fiction. It's an exploration of an idea. What's science fiction all about that?
Not boring.
Yeah. My next question is about awards. Walter, you've won some.
Yes.
Kelly, you've recently just won the Aurora. And Ben has won the Geffen. Do you think awards are important?
You want my honest answer?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so, yeah, I don't win many awards. I'm not up for many awards. It's just, in Canada, I'm up for more because, there's a lot fewer of us in Canada, so that makes it easier. So yes, in general, no, it's never really been on my radar. Now, in Canada, there is a big push towards awards in general, but we're talking literary awards. The kinds of awards that I have joked, if I was ever nominated for, I would want the judges drug tested. They're just not my kind of thing. So I will get asked in Canada, specifically for those types of awards. Does it bother you that you're not nominated for those awards? And my response is that I would much rather have the sports car in my driveway than the prize on my shelf. Because, yeah,
that's a pretty good answer.
That I write sell well in Canada. They do not win Canadian literary awards. So yeah, I'm happy with that sports car.
We would all like sports cars.
I've had varied experiences with awards. George R.R. Martin has created this category called the Bull Goose Loser, which is the person who has been nominated for the most awards without winning any. And I was the Bull Goose Loser for years and years and years and years until I finally won an award, and then I became just another award-winning writer. So I personally do not like awards, and I'd like to do away with all of them.
It's great, by the way. Both of these people are presenting in the Geffen tomorrow.
But if you are going to have awards, I think you should give them to me. I do not insist that you have awards, but just if there are going to be awards, I feel I should have.
Yes, there are also folks nominated for the Geffen. Please vote for the Geffen.
Yeah, right. So, and then there are sort of professional considerations. If you get an award at the right time of your career, it can you know, attract attention and really benefit your career. I think Anne Lepke.
If you happen to win all the awards in
won
that
all
year.
of the awards in 2014 with a first novel. She's going to do very well for a while. And, you know, so that'll be an enormous boost to her career. If I win an award now, it's not going to make a lot of difference. Professionally, I'll be very pleased. Obviously, I'll be flattered, and I'll think it's about time. But you know, it won't affect. It won't vastly increase my readership.
Okay, here again, everything is different. In Israel, we didn't actually have any science fiction and fantasy literary awards for local fiction until 2002, I think.
Something like that.
2002 was the first time the Geffen Award was given for the short story category, and 2003 was the first time it was given for the book, not novel category. And
Uh-huh.
Which she won, she said very, very quietly.
because I'm not really proud about it, because it was in the beginning of everything. There was hardly any fiction worthy of reading, and I had the most friends. And it's I mean, none of my friends voted for me, so you can't really know if it was worth anything or just, you know, my friends voting for me.
At the very least, it can also mean your friends like you. That's not bad.
Yeah. I really like the fact that my friends like me. I mean, it would be horrible if I'd be the one with most friends and nobody would vote for me. Could happen. So we have one literary award. We have contests for short stories, and I think that's what plays the biggest part in Israeli fiction, original fiction in this genre, because people write for contests. People write a lot for contests. Contests are more or less maybe the only regular venue for where you could get sort of professional appreciation, which you can't almost in any other way. The Geffen is a public vote, so you can find out, nowadays you can find out mostly who has the most readers, because it's basically who has the most readers.
It's also whose readers care enough to vote.
Yeah. So there's a lot of voting in the young adults category, less voting in the other categories. So I think in Israel, basically, what's more important is the story contests and not the award. But the Geffen is great because we don't sell stuff here.
Yeah.
Hardly ever. I mean, not when it's, certainly not when it has science fiction written on the cover. If it doesn't have science fiction or fantasy written on the cover and can say, like we said before, yeah, it's in the future and all sorts of weird stuff happens and there are spaceships and God knows what, but it's not science fiction, it's an allegory or whatever, then you're okay. You can sell to the general public and you might get sales. But when you write science fiction, proper science fiction or proper fantasy, no. So you don't get the feedback from sales. You can't tell if you're good or bad, if people like you or they don't by sales. You can't get the sports unless you marry.
Yeah, the number of Israeli authors of any kind who can buy a nice car off the writers is, let's say, small. Let's say minuscule.
A chance to meet people there. And furthermore, editors will do presentations, and they'll tell you their forthcoming books, and they'll tell you what they're looking for.
Do you think, how much of that, because flying to the US is expensive, it takes a long time.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that do you think can be done online?
I think a lot of it can now. Yeah. I mean, nothing quite takes the place of a face-to-face meeting, but I'm looking at the experience of Hannu Rovaniemi, right, who is a Finnish writer,
Yeah.
who writes in English, and who has just a totally berserk point of view. I mean, it's clear that no American wrote this, right?
Yeah.
But he's got an audience. He's doing pretty well, both in Britain and in the U.S.
He was here a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, was he? Oh,
for
sorry, I missed
Utopia.
it.
For
Yeah.
Utopia, the artist formerly known as not Icon.
Yeah. Anyway, that's about as far as I get, without going into a very long presentation, which I haven't prepared.
And now we shall go to the audience. With ears.
My name is Betty, and I have a question. I hope it's not too personal. I've been writing myself ever since I was a child. I never tried to
I'm
publish.
gonna go do like this. This is a big room.
Oh, nice. Okay, my name is Faye, and I've been writing both in Hebrew and English, but only to myself, never showed it to anyone. And recently I had problems with that, with writing, because I've dealt with depression, clinical depression, and I've been taking antidepressants, and I feel that they actually sort of oppress my creativity, or at some point they just prevent me from sticking up with something that I've started. How do you deal with the crisis or depression or any kind of emotional state that presents difficulties for you? How does it affect your writing?
Okay. I think I can address that from personal experience. Since I think depression is the writer's disease, personally, more than anything else, because...
Only group that has more is comedians.
Yeah, okay, no surprise there. But writing is a solitary job. You know, hello, is it not? Oh, no.
The bottles are
Okay. Alien bottles attack.
Next book, right?
Yeah. But for me, writing has usually been a refuge from depression. You know, that's where I go when I'm depressed, and I work and I feel better. But there was a period in my life when I was experiencing clinical depression, and I was under treatment for it. And it was difficult. The treatment made me happy, but in a very sort of chemical way. And sort of having somebody do the happy, happy, joy, joy dance in my head every minute of every day was not conducive to working seriously as a writer. But I had deadlines and I slogged through it, and you know, I think that, and so I try to view it as a refuge. You know, and I'm not depressed anymore, or at least not more than usual. You know, so it's something that you can work your way through. But I mean, you do just have to find a new method for applying yourself to it. And it is made worse by the fact that the job is solitary. Okay, I won't say it's lonely, because whether you're lonely depends on a lot of other things in your life. You know, and I've never been lonely in the way of not being able to see people when I needed to see people. but it is solitary work. And very often it's grinding and difficult work. So all I can say is, you know, I've been there and I got through it. So.
And I'll add, prioritize feeling well over writing is what I would, if your writing can help you feel well, it's great, but if it's that or the other, you can write later.
Tell that Tammy Dickinson.
Might have been advice she would have been smart to take. I'm just saying.
Okay, I'll go to you with the mic.
Do you want me to just quickly answer that? I just going to say, yes, definitely. Depression is something that so many authors struggle with. I've never had clinical, but I certainly get more depressed than the average person. And for me, writing really is my refuge. Writing is how I explore that, and it's probably why I've never had to be medicated for it. It's that writing makes me a very happy person. Now, I do know many writers who are dealing with what you are, and it is that the medication is suppressing that creative, whatever you need to dig down into, and not to give any kind of advice, but experimenting with medications and dosages, they have found finding that happy medium, because obviously you need to be able to function, but you also want to not lose that creativity. So it's finding some kind of happy medium. And there's certainly, if you are online, if you are on Tumblr, you can find many authors who talk openly. We're really finding this a lot now, particularly, again, the young adult community of writers wants to open up more about their own issues and problems because they are well aware of the fact that their audience is dealing with those problems. So being able for a young adult writer to say, I deal with anxiety, I deal with depression, has become rather important. So you certainly can find plenty of them who do detail their experiences with it and how they deal with the creativity versus the medication and feeling well issue.
I'd add it might be a worth follow on Tumblr to follow Matt Fraction, who has dealt with serious depression and who has written very openly about it quite a bit. Matt Fraction, he writes comic books.
I would like to ask the three of you. I've myself been also in a kind of a standpoint which I also write for several years, like since elementary school, and I find myself starting new stories, adding them in the middle, having a writer block. I can't do anything. I find my creativity to really go away. I'm not able to find anything, and it's like, do you think I'm starting to get a little bit scared, and I just feel like I don't know, because I'm all the time thinking about different stuff, and I can't stop having new ideas. But the minute I try to put them on paper, they like fade away, and it's like I have some stories I finished by my dreams, but it's like also I think everything's start fading away, and I don't know if I need advice. I just need to be reassured. What do you think about it? Is like.
Okay, so when I'm speaking to young writers, I often hear things like that. What they say is the idea when they get it is so sharp and it's so bright and it's so shiny and they're so excited, and then they get writing it and it's working well, and then they hit a certain point where it's just not, where it's not as good as what they imagined, it's not as sharp and bright and shiny as they imagined, and they're like, why is that? And I said, every writer has that. It is the idea that when you come up with that concept, it really is bright and shiny, and once you put it on the paper, something happens, and it kind of dulls in a way. And the hope is that then when somebody reads it, it comes back to life, because we see it in our heads translating it for me to paper really does sort of take something out of it. But the hope is when someone reads it, it comes back. So it really is, stick with it. It's not as bad as you think. Most authors deal with that, where that idea is so wonderful and we get partway through and suddenly it's work. And we didn't expect that. And we have to, and there are parts of the book that will be a slog. And we have to get through that and tell ourselves it can be fixed in editing. Nobody has to ever see your first draft or your second draft. You cannot fix a blank page. Slog through it, get back to the parts that really drive you, and just try to have a little more confidence. As writers, we really don't have it. Trust me, there are points in every book of mine where I say, this sucks, repeatedly. So just have more confidence and get stuff done, because there is no market for half-finished books.
Unless you're talking.
Okay.
You need to have written one of the biggest bestsellers of all times, and then have your son be a vampire. Yeah, yeah.
What Kelly said. If you can, please come to my workshop tomorrow, because I'm going to talk about that in some detail and give some actual techniques for dealing with that. Tomorrow?
Tomorrow, 2 p.m.
Sold out. Sorry. All right. Okay.
So please.
Yeah. No, I find that a lot. Is it that initial inspiration will only carry you so far? And oh, the initial inspiration will only carry you so far. I know a lot of people who've written the first 100 pages of a book, and then the original inspiration and all of the energy faded away, and then it becomes work. And the truth is, it becomes work. Okay, but there are ways of getting through it, and one of them is to know exactly where you're going. Okay, I plan my work obsessively. Sometimes I think about it for years before I start it, because I'm working on other projects. But you know, I outline. I outline for me. I have pages and pages of diagrams and arrows and done in you know, different colored ink for different characters and different plot lines and so on. And so before I write the first sentence, I know what the ending is going to be. And that means that I can write to that ending. Okay, and so there's not quite so much wandering around. Some people, they're called plotters and pantsers. Okay, and I'm a plotter. I plot everything very carefully. A pantser writes by the seat of the pants and doesn't know what's happening next. And that's actually harder. You know, I teach a writer's workshop with Nancy Press. I'm a plotter, she's a pantser. And she really wishes that she could do it my way, because it would make things easier for her. Because what happens if you're a pantser is you end up writing a lot of stuff that doesn't end up in the final draft. Because it's all experiments and you're taking it in different directions, and then you find out you don't actually want to go. So you have to throw all that out. And then carry on. And it's also referred to as architect and gardener. You know, the architect plans it. So the Dread Empire's Fall series, which is available in Hebrew, I knew what the final sentence was going to be before I wrote the first sentence. I think that's one. But the point is that you can't rely on inspiration. Inspiration is very fickle. At some point, you just have to realize it's a job, and it's work. And if it's not work for you, that's fine. But at some point, it's just you have to put your butt in the seat and get rid of all the distractions and do the work.
And yeah, butt in seat, hands on keyboard. It's all. And also there is the Jack London quote, which is, You cannot wait for inspiration to strike. You have to go and hunt her down with a club.
Anything to add?
What is it?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Start and finish stuff is basically it.
Thank you. My question actually is especially for Kelly Armstrong. From what I've seen of your writing, you seem to have a very great fascination with the darker side of things. And granted, nowadays, I think the market for darker stuff is immensely...
It's kind of a more of tomorrow's Q&A kind of question.
Okay.
Because tomorrow's Q&A will deal with our guest of honor's writing, and now today we're talking about writing. if you see the subtle difference.
Are you asking about the marketability of darker work, or?
That's part of the question, but mostly I wanted to know, like, how did you? Where does your fascination from the darker elements of stuff come from?
I'll just
How
very
you
quickly
connect it?
answer that, and yes, I will use my mic rather than using my projecting voice. I have no idea, because I'm actually not at all a dark person, at all. I mean, I am somebody who, I have taken fighting classes and that, and I only ever take the first level because I really don't like to hit anybody or hurt anybody. And yet when I write, maybe it's because all of that comes out in my writing. I love dealing with morally ambiguous characters, ethically ambiguous characters. Personally, it's not me, so maybe that's either why I find it fascinating, or that's how I work out the dark ones.
Yeah, I'll mention former Icon guest of honor Carol Berg, who is the sweetest woman in the world and one of the cruelest writers to her characters on the planet. And I could never settle those two personalities.
Hi. Hello. I have a question. I am not myself a writer, but being somebody from the speculative fiction field, I am fascinated by speculative worlds. In fact, in my imagination, can feel, I think, volumes of encyclopedias with insane details about an imaginary world, and yet I am unable to connect to that, characters and plots to that. Basically, my ability to think about it can be summed up by, ooh, look, shiny. Now, how do you basically either balance or translate a very broad and very well thought out world to a story with characters who have like personalities and conflicts and things which are not shiny look objects?
Okay. I have two approaches to writing this sort of thing, and one of them starts with the character. And I decide I want to write about that kind of person. And then I structure the world around that person to put pressure on that person and show the reader what that character is made of. Okay, and most of my books are that. But sometimes I start with the shining world. Okay, and so I structure the character to show the world to the reader. Okay, so that I have the character travel through as many levels of that world as possible, from the highest to the lowest, so that the character has a journey, you know, that goes from heaven to hell and every place in between. All right, and that makes the character interesting, and that makes the character develop. But also, each level of the world is shown to the reader. Metropolitan is an example of that. I came up with the world before anything else, and then I created a character who didn't quite fit into that world, but who had access to power and you know, and power and money on one end, but who was nevertheless, from a lower working class, ethnically challenged neighborhood, right? So that's my approach, anyway.
Yeah, so I mean, sometimes for me it is similarly. It can be the world or it can be the character. I lean a little more towards character, but there are times when I come up with what is, for me, that bright, shiny world, and then I need a character. And when I do that, I'm working on a character who will conflict with that world while finding something she needs in that world. So if I'm doing what I'm doing right now is something that is, I came up with this world, and then I needed to put a character into it, so she will be an outsider coming in, because that makes it a little bit more, being that stranger in a strange place always works well. There will be so many things there that are alien and foreign and against what she believes in, and yet in that world she's going to find something that has always been missing for her. So it is sort of constructing the character who will make the most use of that world, not fit in perfectly right away because you want conflict. You want internal and external conflict. She will not fit in with the others, and she will not feel that she fits in. But ultimately, yes.
Well, my question is about writer's block. I mean, do you have any advices about how to get out of writer's block, how to reach out of it?
I haven't experienced writer's block much. Usually when I have writer's block, I have it a few days at a time. And it's because my subconscious is telling me that I've made a mistake, that I'm taking the story to the wrong place. And my subconscious is resisting. And so I have to go back and look and find out where that moment was when the story started going to the wrong place, and I fix it. Once I fix it, I can write just fine. So, I've never had an experience with extended writer's block. So I have no way to help you if that was what your question was.
And I'm not going to help either. It is similar for me that my idea of writer's block means that I haven't written in 48 hours. But that is, for me, still a big deal because I write every single day. So if I can't write for several days, that's a problem. I feel off. So for me, yes, that definitely. It is that I'm no longer excited about writing the story because something's gone wrong. And I've got to backtrack and see, where did I lose interest in that? Why am I not roaring to sit down and write this? Is it just because I'm at a sloggy part, or is it because something is fundamentally wrong? That's one thing. Number two would be, I don't know what happens next. And I do plot, but occasionally I'll go off my plot, so I have to know that if I go off plot, before I sit down, I must know that day's scene. I cannot sit down and stare at a blank screen. It's very intimidating. I must know where my story is going. So I do something boring, like walk the dog, hand wash dishes, something where I can just keep on thinking and thinking and thinking until I've got that day's work done. And third thing is lack of confidence. There are those days when I just don't feel like I can do this, when I just feel like I can't do this story justice. For some bizarre reason, my confidence is down, and that's when it is butt in chair, hands on keyboard. I can always fix it later, but I'm damn well going to hit my word count, even if it's crap.
I think another thing is, as I said, network. That if you have a kind of support system in place, you can maybe talk to them and they can help you through it. I think that's another useful thing. But try and figure out where you lost interest. I think that's the great thing, and go back and get excited again.
You have a better answer?
Better answer, no. I think I can say a little bit more about writer's block because it's more or less my default state. At least at the beginning, I hated writing. It's not my favorite thing to do. It's work. The main reason I write is because I have to, because I can't not write. And one of the things that, what Kelly said, what helps me, for instance, when I get stuck is obsessive planning. I mean, it's terribly hard to write when you don't know exactly what you're writing. You see in front of blank screen, you're stuck. You're looking at the blank screen, and you're working very hard because you're doing something that you don't know. You don't know what it's going to be. So one of the things that helps me most is sit down and start breaking down. Because usually I have a basic plan, I know very well where I'm going, but I don't have the details. And sometimes it helps starting to break it down to the smaller and smaller details until you get something that clicks. Something that is so detailed that tells you, okay, this I can write because I see the scene, I see the details, and I can sit down and just write them. So you need to make it easier for yourself.
Oh, and one trick, which is never end your day's writing at the end of the scene. Yeah. Always start the next scene, because it's very hard when you're cold to come in and start a brand new scene. Always end it in the middle of the scene. Yeah.
My question is, basically, before you even have the outline, before you know what you're going to write, you have to brainstorm and get that initial idea of where the story is going to go. So I'm wondering what your brainstorming process is, and even more specifically, do you do it on paper, do you have a template, or do you have prompts that you use or on a computer?
My brainstorming process looks a whole lot like me wandering around staring into space. It really is. I tend to do weird things like just get up and start pacing. It's that activity keeps my brain going, and I'm working through all of my possibilities. I have tried the more normal ways, which are like things like using cards and writing ideas on them. But really for me, it's a very mental thing that I'm working through until I get that aha, because I'll have something and go, no, that's not quite right, it's not quite right. So I could do A, B, or C. Let me explore which one has the most conflict, the highest stakes, and so on. So it really is me wandering around. Now, once I've got it, I write it down fast, because it may not even be for the book that it's probably not for the book that I'm currently writing. I'm probably thinking about some new project. And I can't stop what I'm currently doing to write the bright, shiny new project. So I have to then quickly write down everything that I can, so I will, because I think I will remember it 2 months later, I won't, and then I'll feel like I've lost something brilliant, even if it wasn't brilliant at all, but I'll feel that. I also will bounce ideas off of people. So my daughter is 22 now, and she has grown up with me writing and has read everything. So it's very easy for me to bounce stuff. My agent loves to brainstorm. Really, it's her favorite thing. So if I say I need some help working through something, she's on the phone. That is the fun part. So finding people too that I can bounce ideas off of really does help.
I really can't say where the ideas come from. They came from all over the place. It comes from reading. It comes from looking at the news. I've gotten 3 novels out of dreams. Okay, and in 2 cases, all I dreamt was one scene or one image, and that started the whole creative process that ended up with a very elaborate novel, of which that scene was just a tiny component. In the other case, I dreamt that it was the only experience of lucid dreaming I've ever had where I was actually in charge of the dream. I dreamt the first 100 pages of implied spaces and then had to work out the rest of it. But it was easy after the first 100 pages. Yeah, I have a regular brainstorming group that I meet with. Very good writers. Daniel Abraham, Ty Frank, who together write as James S. A. Corey, Melinda Snodgrass, Sage Walker, sometimes George R. Martin. And we get together and we plot each other's books, except for George's, who won't let us. Doesn't want our fingerprints on anything he does, but we have regular sessions. You know, I'll buy my friends lunch, and we'll talk about this idea I have that I'm not quite sure how to make a novel out of, and we'll work it out.
Yeah, referring back to George, you don't want your fingerprints on the murder weapon.
I don't know what that means. Okay.
He kills a lot of characters.
Yeah.
That was the gist of the joke right there.
I want George to kill a lot more characters. I'm very unusual in that regard.
Don't you go?
Hi, I have two questions. First of all, what are your thoughts on fan fiction? And the second, how do you do your research for books? Like your sailing books, things like that.
Those are two pretty big questions.
Yeah. Okay, so research, that's easy. I just love research. Very often I don't have time to do all of the research because I have deadlines and I'm writing along with it. So I try and do the research as I need it. But research is, firstly, if you can't find the answer in the literature or on Wikipedia, then I found that scientists are really happy to talk about their work. So, and I know some scientists, and so I know some people that I can go to. But very often, I will find that I don't know the answer to this. The person who knows the answer to this is this guy who I've never met. So I'll just send an email. You know, if you have time, can you possibly, you know, give me some ideas about this? And they're so happy that somebody cares. They really, I mean, I think science must be kind of a lonely profession too, because they can't explain it to anybody else, or nobody else is interested. So that, yeah.
Something, just a small anecdote. I found myself writing to Dr. Landsman, Dr. Landsman, asking her, how much blood can the human body lose before it's too dangerous? Because I'm a vampire now, right? So I had to know how much blood, and we had this wonderful discussion because she loves this stuff, and we had this wonderful discussion about how much blood the human body. If you ever need answers about stuff like that, Karen will be happy to help. About half a liter to mostly 1 liter. That's it.
Okay. So what was the first part of your question? I'm sorry.
Fanfiction.
Fanfiction. Okay, I think I have, you know, if anyone wants broad strike fan fiction about my stuff, they're welcome to do it. But I think fan fiction is a really interesting training ground. I'm not terribly interested in it myself, but I have a theory about it, which is if movies, because I have written in movies and television, characters in movies and television have no internal life. This was the hardest lesson for me to learn as a screenwriter. They have no internal life. You don't know what they're thinking. You don't know what they're feeling unless they can express it on camera. So you only know what you see. And if people get really interested in a character, they really want to know what that internal life is like. And the movie and television isn't going to tell them. And so they want to provide it for themselves. So I think that's where the interest in media fiction and fan fiction is that you really want to explore the parts of these characters that television and movies can't. So that's my theory as far as it goes.
And I think one of the problems here is that you're not getting very different answers between us. So you get, yes, I mean, fan fiction, I love seeing it on my stuff because it tells me whether my writing is resonating with people enough that they care enough that they want to write more in that world. So for me, that's positive. Do I read fan fiction on my own stuff? No. Because I would probably get at some point confused if I'd read a really good fan fiction and 5 years later go, was that my story? Or was that somebody else's story? I vaguely recall this. Have I written it? Not in the traditional sense, but I have written what I consider paid fan fiction. I've done 5 issues for Joss Whedon's Angel Comics. I have done anthologies that are themed. So Twilight Zone anthology, Clive Barker Hellraiser story. I just wrote and am about to submit, I was asked to write a story for an X-Files licensed anthology. So to me, that is my version of fan fiction. It's taking characters and stories that I love and getting to write my own story in it. So I consider that paid fan fiction. Research, love it. And people think you're writing fantasy, where is the research aspect? Trust me, I find it. When I'm writing my Canesville series, I am researching everything from superstitions, omens, Chicago history, Welsh folklore, other forms of Celtic folklore, gargoyles, CIA brainwashing experiments. I put so much in, and part of it is because it's the excuse to do research and call it work. It's the excuse to buy books as tax write-offs. Whatever. And so I can very easily get caught up in that. And I kind of let myself get caught up in it, and I have to be careful not to dump too much of it into my books.
As far as fan fiction goes, I don't think any professional can read fan fiction. That's not because we don't want to. It's because of what Kelly mentioned. There's the possibility that we might use those ideas without meaning to, right? Or that the writer of the fan fiction thinks we've stolen ideas from him.
Once it's known that you read.
It's known that you read fan fiction, you don't have to have read that story, which had that idea previously. It's enough legally that you're on shaky ground.
Yeah, complete strangers sometimes, people who want to be writers, will send me manuscripts and say, can you comment on it? And I say, no, I cannot. I cannot, and here's why. Unless it's in a controlled setting like a writer's workshop or something.
And yes, exactly the same. I can only read stuff in a controlled thing like a workshop. And I feel bad about that because I love critiquing. I love workshopping stuff. I can't do it because there is that danger, and there's always that danger. And it's a real danger too, because ideas can come up at the same time through completely separate means. I was teaching in Toronto, and I was talking about how one of my students brought in work to the workshop, and it was dealing with the Matilda myth in Welsh folklore. It's not a well-known myth, but guess what I deal with in my Canesville series? And yet I hadn't gotten, the book that mentions it hadn't yet been published. So I had to tell her, by the way, I'm using that same mythology in the book that comes out in 5 months. Just letting you know so that there's no fear that I took it. And there wasn't. We just happened to both be using a rather obscure myth.
Yeah, it's really interesting how these things come up. I mean, I remember there was one year when I read 2 science fiction stories about lobster DNA, encoded lobster DNA. Now, where did that come from? There must have been some scientific article about it that inspired both stories. One was Lobsters by Charles Stross, and I don't remember what the other one was. But certain ideas just pop up when it's time for them. And another thing is, writers have a lot of ideas.